And we are now live.
Commissioner, I'm looking for you.
I am here.
Oh, yes, there you are. So we didn't quite finish. We had more to do for you to run through. And so we wanted to schedule more time for you to come back and finish. And I don't know, maybe we're at the point where you're going to just yield to Hardy, but if you'll pick us up where we left off, that would be great. Thank you.
All right.
And I suppose if anyone's listening, this is Senate Appropriations Committee, and we're taking testimony on the governor's proposed FY 2022 budget. So we have Commissioner Gretchen and Hardy Merrill, and anyone else from your staff?
Just the two of us.
Okay. All right. Oh, that's a song, isn't it?
I think so, but I didn't.
Over Washington.
I didn't have the right melody.
No. Okay.
So I was in fact going to yield at this point to Hardy. We were starting at top of page 6, the D section with D100, and we're working off. I believe you have the language, and I know that Chrissy has the language document that we submitted.
Yeah, she sent it out to us with today's.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And if we're ready to begin, I'm going to start with section D100. In the interest of expediency, I think I'll note here that all of this language and the amounts remain unchanged since the FY21 GovRec, which in turn was unchanged from the prior year's as passed budget language. I think the only thing I would find worthy of note in this section is that in the 21 restatement, the appropriation listed here as $10.8 million for VHCB, that was reduced by 3% in the restatement, and this language restores it to the full amount of the GovRec and of the prior year budget. So if there aren't any questions on this section, I'll move on to D101.
Oh, there's always lots of questions because everybody doesn't, the testimony we get is to not withstand and have the full transfer. That's it.
I would note that in what we went through last week, you'll notice there's a $20 million one-time appropriation in the D1100 section that in fact gets them to what would be their full allotment plus about $1.5 million this year.
No, I'm not saying that. You know as well as I do, every year we get testimony about
oh yeah,
having the full transfer. So in this case, you're making it up, but of course, advocates would like to have the full transfer plus the additional amount, Commissioner.
Indeed, they would.
Okay.
Any other discussion on this section, or shall I move on?
I think I don't see anyone, so this is pretty standard.
Yep.
So
okay.
Unless there are questions, we'll move on.
Okay, very good. Moving to section D101, which describes fund transfers, reversions, and reserves. And this language, there are a number of transfers described, no reversions, and some standard reserve language. So starting with the transfer section, subsection A1 describes the transfer from the general fund to the environmental contingency fund of $10 million. And I would note on this item, initially, the Secretary of A&R had made a request for a smaller amount of a fund transfer. My recollection is on the order of $1 to $2 million for for fund stabilization purposes. And in considering that request, the administration really wanted to turn this into more of an opportunity for an initiative. Fresh in the administration's mind, I think, was that the environmental contingency fund could have, if adequately funded, have been a source of funds to address, for instance, the Burlington High School situation. And in contemplation of PCB testing and possible remediation issues becoming more of an issue on the radar screen in the upcoming year, transferring additional funds to the Environmental Contingency Fund was made part of the governor's recommended budget, so increasing that amount to $10 million, primarily for that purpose.
So that's to do testing and to provide additional money. Now, in the budget adjustment, the 3.5 was simply to do the fit up. What is the cost, estimated cost? Maybe Senator Baruth knows it because it's in his district. What is the estimated cleanup for that one school?
Well, they're thinking the final price tag is something like 10 million.
Okay.
So that's including rent, which I believe the 3.5 is not picking up.
No, it's a fit up. I thought
yeah.
we were told.
So rent, remediation, ... 10 million, the final price tag. So there's another 6.5 million out there in the next few years.
And to clarify, I can't speak much to the specific plan, and I'm sure DEC could help with that. But my understanding was that this was really intended to start a testing initiative more than necessarily for remediation of the BHS experience, which was already being handled on a separate track.
I would note that in the E section, which we'll do later, towards the bottom, there's E709.1. We note that 5 million of this 10 million, up to 5 million, shall be used to complete air indoor quality testing for PCBs in public schools and approved independent schools. So essentially, they're putting aside almost half or up to half of this fund for indoor air quality testing.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going on this. Unless there are questions, I don't see any. Brownfields.
Yep. So number 2, the transfer from the general fund to the Brownfields Revitalization Fund is one component of the $25 million total initiative. This is a transfer to the fund that's managed by ACCD for their sort of part of brownfields redevelopment. This is in combination with a $14 million appropriation in the B1100 section, which was an appropriation to DEC, adding up to the $25 million figure that the governor referenced in his address. Okay. I'll move to number 3.
Yes, Bobby? Yes, go ahead.
Adam, on the indoor testing of properties, schools around the state, is that a cost sharing type situation where the local school puts money in as well?
I don't think it was conceived as such, but I will check and get back to you to make sure I'm right.
Because, I spent 21 years on the school board at home here. And I mean, we hired people to come in occasionally and test the air for, the safety of our own children, and didn't even think twice about asking somebody else to pay the bill.
Well, under statewide formula, we're all paying it.
That's right.
I know. That's what I'm concerned about.
My district was paying that bill, yeah.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, you may.
Senator Starr, when we did the lead bill, we talked about this in ed, and the for good or for ill, the fact of the matter is districts are reluctant to do testing because they may find positive results and be saddled with big remediation bills. And so it's just a regrettable fact of human nature that radon testing wasn't happening, lead testing, PCB testing. So the state stepped in and did the lead testing and the remediation costs, and now that's behind us. So I think this is the only way to get this done, and I'm glad the administration has come forward with a plan.
Well,
Well,
I don't, but with this, it sounds like the testing will probably generate a lot more costs than that will have to be addressed than
Yeah.
what we experienced with lead. Maybe not, but I think some of it's really determined by the age, when your building was built and materials that were used. But so, all right, well.
So can,
Yes,
can-
Senator Westman, I can hear your voice. I can't see everybody, so yes.
so how sure of these numbers are you? When will we have an idea of how many schools it is?
We don't know that.
Yeah.
All they're doing is they're just plunking out of the one time and allocating 10 million for this purpose.
I understand that, but the testimony that we had in natural resources, there are basically 250 schools, and if your school was built after 1980, you're probably in the clear. And if it's before 1980, I know in my my senatorial districts of my elementary schools, 3 of the 10 were built after 1980. And the ed agency is supposed to be coming up with a more accurate list. When will they do that?
I will find out for you, Rich. I'll get back to you.
Yeah, that would, I just think it would be helpful because it would also cut down some of the angst about, well, if we do all this in every school in the state, it's not going to be every school in the state.
I see this as an issue, and it raises the question about how we want to coordinate or get information, because obviously health and welfare, this is an issue from a health perspective. It's an education issue. Natural resources is now taking testimony, and we're putting forward the money. So we've got to make sure that one of the concerns I have is the multiple demands we place to come in and talk to, individual committees on essentially the same issue. So I don't know whether any of the other committees have taken testimony on this issue or not.
Natural resources took testimony with health and welfare.
Okay, all right. So that was done jointly. And what about education?
We all I can tell you, well, it was hard to have education there when there were so many people on education on the 2 of our committees, including the chair.
Okay, well, Senator Baruth went through the lead war, so he understands what this is all about. So
And we were pleasantly surprised with the final bill on that. Didn't turn out to be as dire as anyone thought.
That's why I think if we knew a little bit about what schools we were looking at, it might inform us before we march in.
Well, this doesn't, I mean, as I read this, it's just asking for testing. And I think if you're going to test everybody, and then we'll know.
Yeah.
Well, I think this ties into a larger discussion we want to have. And I may have mentioned it last year, there was legislation that did not make it through the House and much to come over. And that is to do an assessment of our K through 12 infrastructure, rather than doing sort of one-offs on lead and PCB and radon and, whatever, or water, air quality, or the sewer backing up in some of the basements, to look at what it would take for an assessment of our infrastructure, and do it in a more comprehensive way than one sort of health risk by another. So that's a topic of discussion that I think is occurring on the House side. in light of taking up that bill again, that would fund an assessment, so that what you would screen for or assess for, depending on the age of the building, would be in a very consistent and systematic way. So we're probably going to have more discussion around the whole issue of our school infrastructure as the year goes on. So I just want to point that out as we're considering this one recommended area of spending. Okay, so now with brownfields, that's
We're ready to, if there aren't questions or
yeah,
discussion
well, I
on
want to go back.
brownfields.
Usually the brownfields are have the fund, the money flowing into the fund that has been established. Has that been mostly federal dollars for the revitalization, or can you just put this 11 million into this fund in perspective? Is there a general fund contribution every year, or it just depends? Is it all general fund, or is it a combination? Could you just give us a little bit of background about this fund and the revenues that flow in? If we didn't, that would occur anyway. This obviously is to give an infusion to the fund to do more, but could you just give us a little background? Maybe I'm the only one that can't remember the details of this fund.
There is no annual appropriation for the fund.
Okay.
It
I
has
didn't
been,
think so.
kind of catch as catch can in that regard. And, this an attempt to, kind of rev it up. And, I think we've probably all seen the benefits of this. I know I visited an office park in Morrisville that was a contaminated site. And now it's a, thriving commercial center. So I think the benefits of the fund are clear. And I think the governor over the years has wanted to do more in this regard, but there is no annual amount of money that goes into this.
Okay, or, proceeds from an XYZ or whatever. Because I know that our RDCs oftentimes are doing grants for brownfields, but I think they are applying for federal grants to support that initiative. That's why I was just trying to put the pieces together.
Right.
Okay.
An excellent question. And my understanding of the genesis of this 11 million number is that this is the component that would be required for the ACCD fund in order to fully support the DEC's $14 million of work. The two bodies really work in tandem on cleanup and remediation projects. And I can also add on this that there's about $30 million worth of estimated brownfield remediation work, according to a DEC report that I saw. And of that, the $25 million number that's referenced by the governor's address is the amount that was considered to be achievable within FY22. And that's where these numbers have come from.
Okay. So
also, one final note, Senator Kitchell, and that is that looking at the fund balance of this fund 21985, there was literally no fund balance 4 years prior, 16, 17, 18, and 19, as well 20. So, I think this would provide a shot in the arm to a fund that has had no balance over those years.
So just to recap, then the estimated need is 30 million. To address the identified brownfields by the agency by the Department of Environmental Conservation. Between this money, the 11 million, and you said 14 million?
Yes.
14 million is where?
So that is in section B1100. A1, it's literally the top appropriation in B1100.
Okay.
And that is going to environmental conservation. It's not going into this fund. It's going towards environmental brownfield remediation, environmental cleanup costs.
Okay, so I'm just trying to reconstruct the 25 million that is the combination of this 11 and then the 14 million to DEC that's in another section of the budget.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Any questions? Let's we can keep
Okay, I'll
going then.
move on to number 3, which is a transfer from the general fund to the downtown transportation and related capital improvement fund. And what's unusual about this transfer is that this fund has historically been supported by a transfer from the T fund. And such a transfer is also occurring in this budget recommendation a little further down the list. However, based on the additional one-time monies available, an additional $1.5 million of general fund transferred to this fund is part of the governor's recommendation. And what you'll see actually is we get down further on the list, a $4 million transfer from the T fund to this fund as well, adding up to a combined total of about 5.5 million to support this fund and the programs it funds.
All right, that's an ACCD program then.
That's correct.
All right. It'd be interesting to see how those funds have been used. We create these funds and we, you know, and it's just kind of interesting. It's hard to keep them all straight. So this would be a grant. Is this a competitive grant program?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is for fixing roads and bridges or things like that.
No, it's downtown transport and capital improvement. So I think
Yeah.
it's
So my understanding is really focusing on projects like improving downtown access for vehicles and pedestrians. So
Yes.
things that involve parking and sidewalks and really encouraging and vibrant downtown infrastructure.
So that it doesn't include fixing their downtown streets, roads?
I don't think
bel-
so.
No, it does. I would point out to the committee that if you remember last week when we were reviewing the B section, there's a section B1100.1 at the bottom of page 4 that provides language that would actually expand the allowable uses of this fund. Right now, it's restricted, I believe, to designated downtowns. And the governor's initiative would expand the uses of that to village centers and others that are not strictly dedicated downtown development areas. So this would be a broader use of that money, still focused on improving transportation within downtown areas, but it would allow a slightly broader use. So you'll see language in the B1100.1 section that would expand the allowable uses for this money.
Okay. Well, I imagine if it's a competitive grant, it's probably not just to do regular pothole and pavement repair. I expect it's to be competitive. It would be something to do that would, as you say, parking or sidewalks or somehow adding of quality to the, I don't know, quality to, it seems like there's such a scattering of programs going downtown. We really should get a list of all the ones that are there. It's really hard to keep track. We've got Better Places, we've got downtown tax credit, now we've got downtown, we've got this downtown, we've got, I may be the only one, but it's really hard to put them together, just like we did with the brownfields. There's 11 million one place and 14 in another for a total of 25. So maybe that's something our joint fiscal staff can help us with, because it sometimes when you're doing it individually, it doesn't give a sense of what does it all, how, in the aggregate, how are the dollars flowing, and sometimes you say, oh my gosh, that's a lot for that one particular area of the budget, and it's hard to keep it straight when we're dealing sort of a piece by piece here. But we'll maybe I'm the only one suffering from that ability to keep it all together and what funds what and how it is distributed, and by which agency.
So
Well, and it's all fine and good that we help the downtowns, but what about helping the rural areas with their infrastructures?
Oh, you mean like North Troy?
Well, what about back roads, and try to ride your bike on there, and if you haven't got a big tired bike, you get killed with those little skinny tires. So we should have better. No, I'm just throwing in nonsense, but
Oh, well,
our downtowns are very important to be attractive and keep them looking good.
mhm.
But
I think that part of what comes in is we target, and so now the governor wants to expand to village centers that aren't necessarily designated downtowns, which is probably will open up more eligible villages or centers, and then and so more communities can be considered. So,
Yep.
All right, now we're on to forest and parks then.
That's right. Now, this fund transfer, in our general fund summary as part of the executive budget summary, we didn't consider this transfer to be a governor's initiative. It was listed as part of about $4 million total of transfers that were really intended to stabilize special funds that were anticipated to have deficit issues. So one of those, and in fact, the largest of those, is this transfer proposed from the general fund to the Forest Parks revolving fund. And really a major component of this need is calculated based on estimated reduction in ski area lease payments that would be coming to FPR this summer. That
Alice, I've got to
on-
run for.
based on their actual visitation and revenue experience that's occurring during this winter season.
Artie,
Yes.
I'm new to the committee, so this revolving fund puts out money for what?
So money comes in from park revenue operations.
Yeah.
And there is also a component that's fairly large that comes in from the leases on state land held by a number of ski areas in the state. Some of the ones that come to mind on state land would be Killington and Okemo and Stowe. Their lease payments
not Stowe, but Smuggler's Notch, and it's 10% of the lift tickets.
Okay. But
Thank
what
you,
is
Senator
what
Westman.
does the money go out for?
And
It
the money
runs
goes
the
out.
depart-
It does. It's in fact the department's operating expenses. So they're all of their staff, personnel, salary, and benefits that are associated with running the park operations are funded by these revenue sources.
Okay, good enough.
So this is to cover things, direct operating expenses associated with the park's operations. So a big, probably the largest component being personal services.
Thank you.
Rich, you had a question or a comment?
No, I was just it's 10% of the lift tickets that come off from, and all. It's long been in consternation for the communities that some of these ski areas are in, because there's no taxes on any of the property except for a small payment in lieu of taxes. So, anyways.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, but they're the economic engines of the region. So the restaurants and all the other stuff, I'm just using the arguments that get thrown at us, Senator Westman, but
yeah,
without that mountain, those local economies would be quite different.
I hear you, but pretty much Forest and Parks, that's their a very significant source of funds for them.
Okay, so now we're back to the Act 250 permit fund. It's because the cost of providing the services aren't funded by, the fees don't adequately fund the service provided?
That's right. That's the forecast based on the results that are expected from this current ski season that's taking place. And I'll just add, you may recall that in the BAA, there was also a fund transfer.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Of $1.2 million, and that's to this same fund. And the reason there's that amount in the BAA is to directly fund operations involved with starting up in the springtime, the park operations, which would be a deficit problem without that.
Well, don't say that, because we just did the budget adjustment and we told people it was to make up the refunds that had to go back for prepays.
That's exactly what it is. That's right. It's both things. The fund shortfall was related to the refunds made out of the fund, those monies that had already been collected. So now by replacing those, the fund will be able to fund the operations. My point, Senator, Madam Chair, was just that there's a part that was needed sooner in the BAA, and then there's a part that's projected to be needed later, and that's this component in the budget.
Okay. All right. Well, we know that the other thing that's contributing here as well, and that is the fees for users. I don't think, when was the last time they were updated? And this is a department that, basically the revenues to support the work have come from these revenue sources that and fees and user fees. So when was the last time we did an adjustment to the Forest and Parks fees?
I believe it was 2016. I'm saying that because I think that was the last time that A&R had fee adjustments, which included actually on number 5, just below the Act 250 permit fund fee. I believe 2016. Don't quote me on that, but it's been a bit. I did also want to make sure the committee is aware. A&R FPR is going through a study where they're looking at user fees, including park entrance fees. They're doing a rather comprehensive study. I think DFR has actually worked with them, and I believe they're hiring an outside contractor to help them look at the 49 other states, or choose a few states to look at to see how they do it. And so they're looking kind of comprehensively at their fee structure, and you can stay tuned. I'm sure they'll have a proposal for you, if not this year, next year.
Okay. Well, it's quite a length of time here.
Right.
6 years. So, all right, Act 250 is the same thing. The fees are not sufficient to underwrite the cost.
But
That's right.
is that because the permitting is way down because people aren't building, or is that because the cost running the office and doing the review of the permit is really up? Do you know, Adam?
Yes, I think your former colleague on Senate Appropriations can give you an earful on that, and I'm sure she would be happy to. But I think there's two things going on. One, yes, there has been fewer large projects that are happening, in part due to the pandemic, in part due to just economic forces over the, not just the past year, but over the past 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, there have been more smaller projects that pay quite a bit lower fees or no fees to the Act 250 permit fund, depending on what type of changes that they're making. So there's really been kind of a combination of fewer large projects and more smaller projects that are not paying into the fund. It's been somewhat of a perfect storm. So again, I think Diane Snelling would be happy to come in and talk to you about that.
You
We've
know
been
what,
doing this for a
what they
number of years.
tell the farmers when they complain about not enough money to pay their bills is they tell them to tighten their belt another notch or two. We just keep appropriating more money.
It raises the larger discussion, the extent to which general fund is compensating what should be funded through user fees.
Right.
That's what we're seeing here. And, we haven't had, the same is true in transportation in terms of updating the user fees there. It's been a deliberate policy not to update them. When we do finally, it'll be a fairly substantial increase because if they're adjusted even for the CPI, the longer you go, the bigger the amount, and then people complain because it's such a significant increase. But for others, it's just a matter, is the fee structure right? And I don't know, I think Act 250, they're looking at the same thing, are they not, in terms of the fee structure?
Yes, they are. And you'll remember that Forest and Parks wanted to be able to charge a fee for their services as they devote a lot of time to a lot of these permits in terms of wildlife habitat, all kinds of things that they have to weigh in on and use their staff to help with all these permits, and they weren't able to get that through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right, Alice. Okay, now we're down to Clean Energy Development Fund.
Sure, and I believe this may have already been covered up in the B section, since there is an offsetting appropriation. This is the transfer behind that appropriation to the Clean Energy Development Fund. And then the appropriation that was discussed is to support a program to provide access, my understanding is primarily to community solar development projects for low to moderate income Vermonters.
Right. Well,
We had some discussion on that already, I believe. So if you'd like to move on to the next one, this is another.
now the Clean Energy Development Fund, we created that. Was that back with Vermont Yankee and Peter Welch negotiated that $5 million for the dry cask storage? Is that the origin of that fund?
I can't speak to the origin, but I can speak to the money source. And it was indeed Vermont Yankee for many years. And when Yankee closed down, the fund source for the Clean Energy Development Fund dried up substantially. So it's maintained a small fund balance. I want to say $1 million, not even, okay, $500,000. So this is going to give it a shot in the arm, albeit to redirect its focus to community solar.
All right. I imagine we still have the dry cask storage, or what's the status of that?
It's right there.
Right there. Nuclear dump on the banks of the Connecticut. Huh?
That's the thing about dry casks. They're not going anywhere.
That's true. They're cement encased. Alrighty. Victims Compensation Fund, Senator Sears. This is probably something that it's dear to you. Victims Compensation Fund.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Well, I don't know if it's dear to me. It's certainly within the judiciary area, and every now and then it needs to be replenished. Although I hadn't heard anything from Crime Victim Service.
Well, it says it's a reduction of citations and convictions because of, the court's being shut down. So the revenues. Yeah.
This is
Um,
another perfect storm situation, and the specific intention behind the calculation of this number is to provide funding for the victims advocate staff positions. So these are positions that work out of the state's attorney's office. However, they're funded by the Center for Crime Victim Services, and the way they are funded is out of this fund, the primary
No.
revenue source.
See, that's where I would disagree, by the way.
Are you talking about the federal grant funding?
Yeah, they're, here's the problem. They're signed to state's attorneys. We have the, I believe they've, the Center for Crime Victim Services is in charge of the grant. It's been a constant battle as I go over the budgets between the Center for Crime Victim Services and the state's attorneys, because the state's attorneys have to make up for the increases in salary and so forth that is not included that other state employees would get. So I don't think that the replenishing the fund is due to
Well, the
have to check,
explanation,
but I think the explanation is off.
I think the explanation is hard to understand. This is the compensation fund for victims. But then it says here, this is funding for the victims advocate staff positions.
That's right.
And I think they're two different things, one of which is the compensation, and then the other is the funding of the positions,
Sure.
which are in the state's attorney's office. So why would we be putting general fund to support positions into the compensation fund?
So if I may, my understanding of the situation here is that the Victims Compensation Fund both provides compensation directly to victims, and it also provides for the salary and benefit costs of the victims advocate staff positions, who are basically tasked with the purpose of identifying the victims and connecting the funds to the victims. So they're present in the courts and work with victims to get them the compensation that they're deserved. So they are funded out of this fund. And to speak to Senator Sears' comment on the personnel cost pressures, our understanding is there is a perfect storm situation here, which is they've got greatly increased staffing costs as a result of a collective bargaining agreement that provides for significantly increased compensation and benefits to the staff positions. And then at the same time, the revenue into the fund has significantly decreased due to the reduction of citations and convictions. And one of the things that was interesting to me is it's not simply criminal convictions in the courts that result in revenue into this fund. That's one of the sources, but it's also traffic citations are a major part. And during the pandemic, there was less driving, and there was less of an effort to make traffic stops as well. And that really had a big effect on the revenue. That's my understanding.
Well, I think we need to get some clarity around
yeah.
what we get for the federal grant and how that funds positions and what this fund is doing, because I think we've had a lot of discussion, haven't we, Senator Sears, with
Oh, God. But the
yeah.
Center for Grant, first of all, the Victims Compensation Fund should not be, in my opinion, should not be under any circumstances fund positions within the state's attorney's offices that are funded through the federal grant. Two separate things. And I've had, I think I need to have a meeting with perhaps you, Hardy, and John Campbell and Chris Fennell, if you want to set that up. Or I can ask Chrissy or Stephanie to set it up. My only problem is I don't have the ability right now to set up a Zoom meeting, but I do think it needs to be dealt with, because I don't think this is, may need to be, the Victims Compensation Fund also should be getting funding from offenders paying off their restitution.
That's correct as well. That's another
No.
component of the fund.
I think we better look at this.
Yeah, because I didn't realize we would be funding positions out of the compensation
shouldn't
fund. I
be.
thought they were funded through that grant, which was shrinking, and then we did provide additional money, I believe, to
General fund,
yeah, to the state's attorneys to make it up. So
right, the collective bargaining agreement. I think we provided general fund, so I would be happy to meet with you. I don't know how to, I mean, maybe next Thursday afternoon. We usually get done at 3:30. If we can get a hold of Campbell and Chris Fenno, and probably Annie Noonan, best person, maybe not John Campbell, because Annie handles all the books.
I'll suggest Senator Sears that we also include the Center for Crime Victim Services in a
Yeah,
meeting.
that's Chris Fenno.
Right, yeah. Thank you.
mhm.
So I just need to let the committee know that I need to jump off in a moment to actually participate in testimony with the House Energy and Technology Committee, which is related to the next fund transfer, coincidentally, which is from the general fund to the Technology Modernization Special Fund. And I need to speak to that committee about one of the technology modernization elements, which pertains to the budget system that we use in the Department of Finance and Management.
So we're going to create another special fund here in this budget.
That's correct.
That's correct. And
I'll shut off my,
You're doing what?
I said I'm I'm muting myself. I should not have laughed publicly at setting up another fund.
Well, we talk about everybody and, our colleagues in the House have been obsessed about the number of special funds and the need to reduce them. And in spite of that, we don't seem to be doing very well in reducing the number. I've never gotten very obsessed about it, but they tend to be concerned about the numbers. And many of the ones with any money in them are the ones that you don't want to eliminate anyway. So this is the Modernization Special Fund, right? Well, good luck
Right.
with the Technology Committee. The question is, we only need about $1 billion to support our IT needs, and this is 52,000 million toward it. Well, every bit counts. So does that mean, Adam, you're going to take over since Hardy's
Means
got
I
to
will
go?
step in. Hardy, you want to do the 2 clean water ones, and then I can
Yeah.
step in?
yeah, Adam will also in section E cover the detail behind some of the components that make up that $52.7 million
Right.
transfer.
Right.
The Clean Water Fund to the Agricultural Water Quality Special Fund is one that occurs every year. This amount is up about $1 million from the transfer that occurred in the 21 restatement. The Clean Water Fund transfer to Lake and Crisis Response Program Special Fund is also consistent with the prior year in language and amount. That's happening again. The Transportation Fund to the Downtown Transportation and Related Capital Improvement Fund. This is the $4 million from the T Fund in addition to the 1.5 that I described earlier. And I just want to make one final comment before I move on to the other committee, which is on number 12 from the TIB fund to the TIB Debt Service Fund. There is a typo in this in number 12. It should read for funding fiscal year 2023 transportation infrastructure bonds debt service. And that amount is, that correction is made in the explanation that you'll see below. The explanation is correct. And this is a transfer that happens every year. It's required in order to release funds in FY22. The debt service for 23 needs to be reserved. So we will make that correction to the year in the language for number 12. And with that, I'll thank the committee for their time, and I'll have to move on to the other meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can pick up where Hardy left off in the next section, which is the top of page 8. Those are typical transfers to the general fund. The one that I would point out in the next list is the education fund. That is not a typical, it doesn't normally appear on this list, but I think we've spoken to you earlier in terms of one of the revenue sources for the general fund. This year is a $3 million transfer from the education fund. That $3 million is the anticipated revenue from the introduction of Keno into our stable of lottery product offerings. So because Keno is a lottery product, those funds, as the committee knows, goes into the education fund. We are taking that additional revenue that we see coming from Keno and we're transferring it to the general fund. Further down in the E section, you'll note that that $3 million transfer to the general fund is given to or transferred to the CCFAP to expand capacity in our childcare programs.
Sure.
And if Keno doesn't go, there's some people who oppose it. Then the childcare increase has no funding revenue base.
That's correct. It's meant to be, shall we say, a package deal.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Moving further down, there's really nothing unusual of the next direct apps to the general fund. We took them from the agencies and departments at their advice, from the AG, from the Secretary of State, as well as from the Treasurer for unclaimed property. Further down on page 8, you see the direct app. Pardon me, the direct app from DFR. That is a bit larger than last year, not dramatically so, but I think about $500,000 or so larger from last year based on what they think their activity will be over FY22.
Senator Baruth, you had a question?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Adam, if we could go back to the Keno just for a second.
Yes, sir.
So the proceeds right now from the lottery go to the ed fund, correct?
That's correct.
All of them, yeah.
Oh, okay.
The net proceed. I mean the net. Yes.
Okay. So this is I understand it's a package deal and a desire to have basically new funding tied to a new source, but it seems like it. I could see an argument being made for why not let that flow into the ed fund and reduce people's property taxes. So
Then you can't. Then you have no funding for that childcare
no,
enhancement.
understood, but I find myself wondering over that because the administration, on the one hand, is usually very loath to raise people's property taxes, and yet here it's taking what would be money that would achieve that purpose, but putting it out in a new way. Maybe there's nothing you can say other than what you've said, but it seems it gets us in the business of diverting money out of the ed fund from a source that's already been designated for that. So I get just a little leery about that.
Well, I had said earlier, if Keno passed, maybe the better thing to do is keep 100% of the lottery and just do an adjustment of the percentage of the rooms and meals revenue that go into the ed fund, because that's a 25%. So you could move that down and keep it all in the ed fund and reduce and put an equivalent amount into the general fund side. So it keeps that ed fund clean. I think that's what you're talking about, Philip. And I think I mentioned that, and the commissioner said, well, that would have been an option to do it that way, but it's all theoretical until Keno is approved.
Right.
That's correct.
And I understand it does increase the chances of passing Keno if it's tied to something that's very worthwhile, like childcare. So anyway, just a comment.
You're quite connecting the dots there, Senator Bruce.
They're pretty big dots.
Okay, all right,
You know-
where did we leave off here?
I just
Oh,
wanted
we
to
were
note that I'm
doing
already down a
DFR.
beer disagreeing with Senator Baruch. So I think I'm going to stick.
I'm keeping track, but I would note Senator Ash left the Senate still owing me 2 beers. So.
So further down towards the bottom of page 8, there is our annual contribution to the budget stabilization reserve, the general fund stabilization reserve. That's our estimate, a little over $3 million. And then the final entry on page 8 is twofold. One, our annual contribution to the 2753 reserve. And then unusually, it will be our first use of that reserve in that the 7th year is actually FY22, when we expect to have a 27th week of payroll and a 53rd week of Medicaid. So we, as you remember, when we were in last week, I mentioned that one of the revenue sources to the general fund this year was $24 million from the 2753. And you see that here in D102. We're sending that money to the general fund, and it actually will go to the agency of administration for the secretary to distribute, as we do with pay. So that
Can't believe 7 years has gone by so fast,
know.
Adam.
I know. Well, you know, I would have to say that this, I think, is a signal of the enlightened policy, 7 years ago. I mean, I'm sure you guys remember, I do too. I was at that point a legislator, and it was a really challenging end of session when we realized we had an extra pay period and we had an extra week of Medicaid. That was not fun.
No,
so-
it's a way of, it's sort of like every month putting some money away for your property taxes rather than paying them.
Right.
Having to cough it all up at once.
So this year we benefit from that, and then of course next year we'll start afresh. So this moves us down top of page 9 to the E section, and we start off in the E section as we always do with executive branch positions. I would note that these positions are intended to be taken from the position pool, which has capacity. And the first section, the first one, pardon me, the program development and policy analyst, those are to work alongside the executive director of racial equity. You'll recall that there's an initiative that's funded to beef up her staff. I mean, I think you guys at this point realize, I mean, she's got any number of requests for studies, for training, and she just needs staff. And so we're providing 2 positions, funding 2 positions for her, and this is the language that would provide those positions. There's also a half-time position in public service, and this goes along with the $10 million initiative for affordable solar, community solar, in the Clean Energy Development Fund. The folks in public service said they can administer the program, but it would, as you might imagine, it would take a bit of time, and so they're asking for a 1/2 FTE to get the program going and to help administer it. The public safety is asking for a paralegal. You guys are probably aware, this was news to me, but I don't know, something over half, maybe 2/3 of the public records requests we get are to public safety. And, I think last year alone, they got something like 2,000 requests, FOIA requests. So they're backed up and they're trying to be responsive. So Commissioner Schreling finally came to me, earlier last fall and said, look, if we want to do this right, we need some help. So there's a position for him there.
I have to say, Adam, the workload associated with FOIA is becoming increasingly demanding in terms of staff resources. I know the Public Service Department, I think, has got almost one full-time person responding to, and some people have said perhaps we've got to start thinking about how we manage some of these FOIA requests or start charging for the staff time, because sometimes one individual or a very large entity could be making a lot of requests, and it does add substantial costs that everybody, all the taxpayers are having to cover. But the workload, I think it's kind of sneaking up on us in how overwhelming the work is and how people are trying to accommodate it within their regular jobs. Senator Sears.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a bill on this, and it probably won't be popular, but with some quarters. But I had a situation here with a constituent who volunteered to chair a local communication utility district, broadband district, I guess. And he was inundated with public record requests. There he is volunteering. It's not his job. He doesn't have staff, doesn't have this, doesn't have that. And I'm also concerned about the public record requests when you start speaking specifically to this particular request, when you have body cameras and you have to go through all the footage to delete things that shouldn't be public. Like a victim, say you have a victim of a certain crime, do you really want that to be public? Their, comments and also, it's a really touchy situation here, and I don't think we've really looked at it. And there are also, for lack of a better term, I think, people who have gone into this. This may not be in terms of government, but I know a small company here has been inundated with these types of requests because they have some kind of a public, they produce things for the public, for the state, or make things and have government contracts. It may not be the state of Vermont, might be the US government. So it is something that ought to be addressed, but I don't know, you don't want to be seen as being anything less than transparent.
Yes.
There certainly are a lot of cases about it. So.
Well, we get them from time to time.
Yeah. But I mean, legally, there have been a lot of decisions about them, and it seems each time that it becomes more expansive.
Well, it's the issue of being government transparency and being able to get public records. And then there's the issue of public records to try to.
And what you can charge or can't charge.
Well, that too, but I think there's a lot of issues there that again, it's a really touchy subject.
It is touchy, and I would suspect that, in fact, public safety has argued that, the need for public records request, I bet, that is just the tip of the iceberg across all of state government relative to the workload that is associated with complying with them. So, and then when you have, the sort of instrumentalities of the state that are getting swept up into this and they're not staffed and they don't have the expertise. It is really creating some a real burden, particularly when you're talking about when you're dealing with volunteers. Who wants to deal with this?
Right.
So, or how we help them, if we say yes, we want that level of response, then how do we support the legal requirements that exist? But I would say probably, do we have any other department in this throughout state government, Adam, where we actually have a dedicated person to handle public records requests?
I don't think so. Most departments have a point person. For example, within finance and management, Joe Harris does, is our first stop. But, if there were, I would guess that it would be human services because they have, a large department. They also have corrections, which often gets voided. But that's a good question. I don't know.
Well, it would be helpful to know what it's costing us.
Okay.
I mean, and also, by the way, that would include we should probably ask our joint fiscal office to look at what it's costing the legislative.
Well, Luke has done some, we had some discussion around it. The other question is, because there are legal timeframes and constraints, it also, at some point we might have to look at a centralized system where all the requests go through one door, so to speak, and get managed and tracked, because there have been times when there's been confusion around, when it was received and how it was submitted and so forth. So not that we're going to solve it today, but I think from what we're seeing is that this is an issue that's only going to become larger, and how we manage it and how we make sure that we're adhering and have the most efficient systems in place, have yet to be thought through.
You can ask them to narrow the case, but I think you have 10 days and they don't have to narrow what they're requesting.
Right.
And if they don't narrow it, you still have, I believe, the 10 days.
So a lot of it is, it really is a tremendous amount of public research as
And
well.
resources.
Yeah. So I don't know whether this is almost getting into government operations arena, in all honesty.
Well,
but I do think you're right, Jane, that, I think it's been creeping up. The cost to government around this has been creeping up steadily over the last 10 years. And it's that tension between making it transparent and easy to make the requests. But if you have one thing I was thinking while you were talking, if you have a one-stop shop where you can sort of click the button to request documents from all these different areas of state government, you can see how there are a few people that would
overload the system.
Yes. So it's very, very challenging. And
I think they call them serial requesters.
Yes. Well, so I think you're right to say this is going to continue to come before the committee, though, in terms of, the cost to government to do this. So
it may be a government operations issue, but it's an appropriation issue when it's costing the state money. And we have to hire somebody to work for the Department of Public Safety in order to just handle records requests.
A paralegal, I think we were looking at a salary of about 50,000 plus the benefits is the third on top of it. So that's just in one department. So and it's so that this request really begs that larger discussion around what is the volume, what is the cost, how is it managed, or the extent to which there are, a reimbursement of cost depending on who's the requester or the frequency or whatever. So I don't have any answers right now, but your request for this position certainly raises many other collateral issues, Commissioner. So I see the treasurer's here. How many more do we have to go through? All your positions?
Madam Chair, I've not yet begun to fight, but I can just finish out E100. The next positions, sub B of E100, are the positions that were created in answer to the governor's executive orders. One professionalizing the NRB board, and the other creating an agency of public safety. I've heard some rumors that I can't confirm that perhaps those executive orders were not greeted with open arms by you folks. But nonetheless, those positions are here in the budget. And I think they deserve consideration to the extent that we're going to move forward. And then finally, there are two limited service positions within DEC that are part of a kind of a reorganization that the Secretary Moore has done. She's repurposing, those aren't new, she's just repurposing positions.
Does that have to does that have to go through our approval?
I don't think
existing?
so. I think if it were in
I
the
thought
budget.
if they were creating, but all right, well, seems like we're reclassifying, but we'll have to ask when they come in.
Okay. And then as Hardy mentioned before he left, the next section deals with the technology fund, which indeed is a new fund. Secretary Quinn is spending all his time. In fact, he might be, sleeping in House Energy and Technology Committee as I speak. He's been spending a lot of time looking at how the fund would be deployed. You'll see in the language that we provided selections that are recommended for funding. And, we hope that this is a list that the body will look at and speak to us about. It's certainly not a final list, but it is a list that we believe are the most pressing projects that probably should be funded today as opposed to tomorrow. So,
well, I'm obviously the House committees have got the focus, and we'll have the benefit of their work. And and the question really becomes if you create a fund, what are the ongoing revenues to support it? We can very easily appropriate money from the one-times to identified projects, but the bigger problem, and it's one that's been around a long time, back when Jim Reardon was in your position, where everybody said, yeah, we should have a special fund, and that would be great, and we would have it available and sort of like a capital bill for IT projects, but it never got actualized, really, because there was never available funding to say we're going to allocate this amount. The only place I think we've actually had that kind of perpetual funding is with the tax department modernization system.
Right, and that's the perfect example. But of course, they're a revenue-producing shop, so you can imagine. But Senator, there are places where we do have revenue from non-revenue producing shops. The favorite example I like to use is the healthcare claims assessment, that in fact does go to fund technology. It just doesn't fund state technology. It funds hospital technology. Not to say that's a bad thing, but there are areas that we've looked at, and I should say that there's a group of I believe 6 wise men and women who are studying precisely what you mentioned. They look at potential revenue sources to make this a sustainable pool, because you're right, we could go through $50 million in technology without batting an eyelash. In fact, one project within human services, the integrated eligibility, could probably use the whole damn thing. So
Yeah.
what I would say is what appears on this list are projects that are, in real need, since I've been here, which is admittedly only 4 years in this job, but, each one of these projects has appeared on a list at some point when we've been budgeting. And each time we've said, maybe next year. Some of these we do fund already. I would note, you'll see on here, in fact, the integrated eligibility project, which typically has been funded through the capital bill. And one of the statements we're making by putting it on this list is really the capital bill, we've weaned it of technology projects over the years. It's really not an appropriate way to fund technology. But the last project in there really is this AHS project on integrated eligibility. So here we're kind of taking that last step and moving all technology projects out of the capital bill. So that is one of the projects that shows up here on this list.
Okay.
But there are a number of others.
Yeah. Well, we'll obviously be looking at them and having the benefit from that exhaustive amount of testimony that apparently is going on in the House committee.
Right.
Because they do have a technology committee, and technology is not, we don't have that same committee, singular focus that in the Senate side. Other questions of Adam? Otherwise, we will let him go back to whatever he wants to do, other than, I'm sure he'd like to spend the rest of the afternoon listening to OPEB and the treasurer.
Well, Madam Chair, I've enjoyed listening to the treasurer over the years. I might just become a fly on the wall for this next segment with the
All right.
treasurer's permission. So, okay, thank you very much.
She's
Madam Chair.
muted, and I think it would be fine if you want to listen to what we're about to hear. I don't think it'll
Okay.
be anything very new to you, but we have the treasurer, and treasurer, you have Pierce, you have some staff here.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the areas that we want to better understand is where we are right now with the OPEB. And we've heard from Joint Fiscal that if we use this opportunity to make a payment on our OPEB obligation, that would have a beneficial impact for when we go out to bond. And so we are in the process of thinking about, in the House as well, a separate appropriations bill to move on a faster track than just the big bill, to address some areas of spending that might be more time sensitive, that are time sensitive. And one of the things that we want to consider out there for this bill, and I think you've been talking to the appropriations in the House as well, is could you please give us an explanation around that OPEB, that payment, how it ties into the next bond rating decision or review, and why we should make this a priority for, we have some one-time money for its use. Now, as you know, the appropriations committees have in the past tried to use, when we've had some additional money, to meet these obligations. And so this is why we're asking you to come today.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair. We'll get started. I'm going to start by first saying, Adam, you are always welcome. And we enjoy working with finance and management and the administration. We're kind of joined at the hip when it comes to finance and management and working with all your staff. So thank you for all the good work, and thank you for working with us. I'm going to introduce my staff. I'm going to go from right to left on the screen that I have. So I have Michael Clausen, who is our Deputy State Treasurer, and been working a lot on healthcare on the liability side. Ashlyn Doyon, our policy director, and she spends a lot of time talking to you folks on different issues, and we're very pleased to have her on our team as well. Skip past Adam, he's not quite part of our team, but we like working with him. On the next row, we have William Krewald, who is our who is our Chief Financial Officer. Been with us a little over 2.5 years, something in that range, Will. He's really done a fantastic job, and I'm delighted to have him as well as the rest of this team here. And then I noticed that Scott is on my screen between Adam Gresham and Senator Becca Belliot. So I think he's in good company there. Scott is our Director of Financial Reporting and is responsible for our bond deals and going out and doing the work on that and working with our financial advisor and our bond counsel. And our expectation is that we will be doing a bond issue likely in March, getting the majority of the work done, and then possibly into early April, and we'll see what the schedule is with the bond rating agencies, whether it's the end of March or early April. But either way, it's coming up, and it's not much time before we get there. So last year, we presented a pathway to get to pre-funding for the OPEB, which means other post-employment benefits, which is basically healthcare. And COVID and a reduced appropriation from our budget request precluded moving forward on that proposal. But we believe there's a real opportunity right now to move forward, and that this is the year. We have a plan for both the state and the teachers. The teachers is much further along. We've got the template for a plan on the state side, and I do have to admit that the state is a heavier lift. And looking at this, we see several advantages to pre-funding. First, pre-funding will allow us to reduce the unfunded liability as it stands now on our books. I think the 22 number, and I'm going to look to my staff, Will, to correct me, the 21 number, is 1.2 billion, and that would lower the number to around 600 million. Is that correct? And the 22 is an $800 million reduction?
Yeah, 824.
Here we are. We're in the ballpark there. So having that reduction on our books, I think, is extraordinarily important. And just to make clear that the actuarial estimates are very good, I think we've got some good work here, but they are indeed estimates, which is why we built in some volatility space at the front end, which I think is very, very, very helpful. The other advantage is that interest will be generated to pay for future liabilities. In the pension system, someplace between 60 and 62 cents on a dollar to a retiree, paid to a retiree, is from investment income. Right now, we're doing dollar for dollar. And I will point out, Senator Kitchell, if you remember, we fixed a problem in 2014 where we weren't even doing dollar for dollar. We were putting it on our credit card. And we created the Retired Teachers Health Medical Benefit Fund, which we refer to as RTHM, with a lot of help from the legislature. And by doing that, instead of taking it out of essentially pension performance, we saved between 2014 and expected through 2038, $480 million on our books. And we think that that's a pretty good number. But interest is important. And why there are no guarantees from the bond rating agencies, and I do need to make that clear, there is no guarantee. It's really clear from their narratives with us and their conversations with us that our other post-employment benefit liabilities, our retirement liabilities, are a big issue, along with the issues of demographics and our workforce and how they interact with those liabilities with a smaller population that puts more pressure in terms of payment on those liabilities. So again, we can't say this is going to happen, but we do believe that as we move into a conversation with the rating agencies during our next bond issuance, that this will be an important issue, and that making progress in reducing our liabilities, both on the retirement side, or at least give a clear message on that, and actually having legislation in place to reduce the liabilities on the OPEB side is extraordinarily important and gives us a better position in terms of our conversations and relationships with the rating agencies. For the teachers plan, we have submitted a pro forma, which I think you folks have. It's a draft, and I do have to make one change since we did that draft. And frankly, it requires a little bit more initial cash contribution. So I'm always looking for dollars to make sure that this thing is not volatile, and that we've got a good plan going forward. We will also have a proposal for the state retirees healthcare plan. The actuary is currently running some numbers. We hope to have this within a week past yesterday, and it is a heavy lift, but we believe it's doable, although it may require a structure that more closely is in line with the current ADEC, actually determined employer contribution. By doing this, we have addressed all 4 buckets. We have a plan in place, a proposal to you that's obviously going to be vetted. And I don't think I've ever remembered an occasion when we sent over a long-term plan and you said, okay, that's it. Beth has a good idea. Let's just do it. You go through a process with us of looking at that, vetting it, making some changes. You have our retirement recommendations, some of the issues in the appendices. You'll see some various scenarios, well over 30 to take a look at. And we hope that both your Senate and House GovOps will be taking up those issues. But we have the 4 buckets because we've taken and addressed those. We have a very well articulated plan for the teachers and the mechanics and a template for the state. And I think that moving forward, we're going to have some discussions, but don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And we think that this is a good step forward for the state. So I'm going to briefly go through the chart that you have, and I'm not sure who's going to put that up. My technology skills are not what they should be. So I'll let somebody else put that chart up.
Chrissy, do you have it or?
Is it a part of the letter? I'm just pulling up the letter is what I have.
Yeah, it's a few pages into the letter. It's a nice.
The 4th page, Beth.
Fourth
there you
page. Okay, I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're going to walk through this and please ask questions, and we'll try to. This is complex, but we'll try to make it as simple as possible. Most of you know I tend to get in the weeds. I'll try to avoid that, hence a very small presentation instead of my typical 60-page PowerPoint, but we'll walk through this. So as you know, the governor's budget did not fund our fiscal year 22 request by 6.7 million. We asked for 41.8 and the proposal was 35.1 million. But if you look on the 4th column over, starting with the fiscal year, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, you see the contributions. And in 22, we have that established at 41.8. So initially, we would like to request restoration of that $6.7 million. Now, I said that I had one change to this. And
I'm sorry, Beth. I'm
Sure.
really having trouble finding the 6.7 here.
Okay, I'm going back.
Which
Yeah.
year are we on? 22?
22.
Okay.
And if you take a look, the 5th column over, counting the fiscal year column. So it's called contributions during the fiscal year.
Yeah, okay. All right, I got that.
Yeah, and you see the 31.8. That was a
Yes.
reduction to our request last year where we wanted to start this pre-funding pathway. This year, our request was 41.8 million.
Okay, I have to
Sure,
sort this out. We are only talking about OPEB here.
that's correct.
Okay, so what we paid for the ADEC is on a different graph. We're only dealing with OPEB.
Yep. We're only dealing with OPEB. The pensions are a separate issue.
Why don't we just give the whole state budget here before we get done? This is
Well-
a huge amount of money, isn't it?
Well, these dollars, would go out the door in any event. If you take a look at the benefit payments, they're very significant, and those are net of what we call EGWIP. So the actual dollars that you appropriate are higher. We do get money from the federal government called EGWIP, Employee Group Waiver Plan, and is essentially a subsidy for our prescription benefits.
So this is just then EGWIP is for state employees. I know that we switched to that. Or is that what we're just talking, I need to be clear. I'm looking at the graph. Are we talking about teachers here? Or are we talking about state employees on this graph?
This is the teacher system, and both systems,
Teachers.
yeah, both
Okay.
systems applied for and received EGWIP. In fact, the teacher system was first, and following their good work, the state system moved into an
Okay,
EGWIP as
all
well.
right.
Yeah,
Okay,
Madam Chair.
Yes,
I think it'd be much better if we talked about either one group or the other group and not keep switching from state employees to teachers, and because you can't keep up with that lateral movement when you keep
no,
jumping.
that's why I'm asking. So the graph that we're going through now is
It's
for
all teachers.
teachers. It's for teachers, and it's only for the OPEB.
Right, it's not for pensions, it's for OPEB, the healthcare benefits, and it is
Okay.
strictly teachers. I think the question was, on EGWIP was whether that was in one plan, for instance, the state plan. We're concentrating today, sir, on just the state OPEB fund. And
Okay,
again,
so
yeah.
Senator Sears, your hand is up.
I think you're on mute, sir.
Thank you. I'm having a jargon problem here.
Sure.
And I'm also having a visual problem that I cannot, the graph is so big
Mhm.
that there's so many numbers and they're all, I've tried to put on my glasses, but is there a way to enlarge this a little bit?
I'll let my folks see if they can. In addition, sir, we have it up on our system. We could email it to you if that would be helpful.
Probably that would be.
Okay, so I'm going to ask whoever has that on file to email that and
Maybe the whole committee could use it on a separate screen. I can put it
Sure.
on my iPad. It'll be a little
Sure.
easier.
And Senator Sears, I sent it earlier with our handouts too, so if you can find it easily there
Oh,
too.
God. Okay,
Okay.
right, fine. Out of
Read an email.
72 emails in an hour, I mean, I find yours.
I'll resend mine real
With
quick.
all due respect, Chrissy. Oh, I found it. Oh, my
There
God.
you go. There you go.
No, I
Um,
didn't. Actually, I didn't, Chrissy.
Um,
There's nothing in your email.
Okay.
Underneath.
I'll resend.
Well, resend. So Senator Westman, you have your hand up now. Senator Westman, I can't see you, but your hand's up.
Yep. So when you get to the place where you said the 41.8 is $6 million low, how do I see that on this chart?
It's actually the amount that we were looking for. The administration's budget was 35.1 million. We've asked for 41.8. We've restored that here. That's the same request, frankly, that we made last year to jumpstart this. And so the difference between the 35.1 and the 41.8, which is a fiscal year 22 number under the heading contributions during the fiscal year, is 41.8. So our first request is to restore that that appropriation or that request. Because Senator, yes.
So I'm just trying to see where could I see the 35 versus the 41, because you're asking us to fill the $6 million hole.
Right.
And so how can I see what I'm trying to fill as
Okay.
a hole on this?
Okay.
So I could probably, this is Adam speaking. Rich, that's section B515 in the budget that the governor submitted. There's a 35.1 recommendation. That's section B515.
Okay.
So it's not on the graph, it's in the
That's correct.
budget. And what Beth is saying, the request was for 41.8. The administration is recommending 35 or is budgeting 35.1. So,
Okay.
so,
It's just hard to see it in this graph. I got it.
Yeah.
I got it though. I got it.
okay.
If you go to your email version or I'm sorry, whatever was said, my technology skills, I'm pretty good at research, but when it comes to technology, I let somebody else put these on the screen. But I think you have an email version with your materials that if you want to follow along that way.
These, okay, contributions. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
these really grow, my gosh.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We must be making a lot on our investments.
We'll talk about that in a moment, sir. And I think I have good news for you on that. Because I knew you would ask that question, Senator Starr. I mean, it is a question that I routinely hear from you. And I think, again, we have some good news for you.
But if you don't pre-fund, you have nothing to get a return on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, at some point, it's going to take a while. You want to get to that same place that your 60 some odd percent of your payment to a retiree or for premiums is generated from interest earnings rather than taxpayer dollars, which are one for one and don't have a lot of interest associated with it.
The only thing, Beth, is I look at this, very few members of this committee are going to be alive to reach that point.
And I can guarantee you I will be with those folks. I do think that Will and Ashlyn on my staff, and I hesitate to ask Scott's age, so I'm not going to. But I certainly won't be here when that happens. But I'm looking forward to have established a legacy that says we've done this. And I think that would be a joint legacy with you folks, because we will have accomplished a great deal by doing this back in 2014, Madam Chair, and that cost money, but it saved money in the long run. As I said, 480 million, and we're reaping the benefits that every year, double-digit millions, and as I said, out to 2038, it will come to 480 million. So you have to make an investment, and that's what we're doing here. But I think there's some advantages to making this investment in terms of budget stability, predictions. Yes.
What I am finding so hard to understand is when this OPEB benefit healthcare was put in, I don't know, probably in the time that I've been in the legislature, and it never was specifically funded. Did
That's
anybody understand the liability or the contribution obligation that this benefit was going to present? And I'm sure Senator Starr and Senator Westman would have been here, because you've been here for 3 decades or more. So when was this healthcare benefit put in, Beth?
Sure. So let me just do this in kind of a two-part answer. So prior to, and you are absolutely correct, Madam Chair, and you were part of the discussion on how to get there, and I'll get to that piece in a second, but up to 2014, what we did is we had a sub-fund within the pensions to pay healthcare. But we did not fund it. For instance, in one year, we required 24 million. We received 4 million. So that $20 million, getting to the point of opportunity cost, we essentially put it on our credit card. We had to pay the interest on that. That 20 million cost the taxpayers 60 million. Out to the end of 2038. And if you do it the next year, and you do it the next year, and you do it the next year, you end up with a very, very, you're taking the wind out of the sails of the pension. And why we fixed the ADEC, the ARC, in 2007, we continued to do this until 2014. And we did present this to you in 2012 and 13 and 11, actually. And I appreciate you folks dealing with this and creating an opportunity to fix it. So we had it on our credit card, and then what would happen is
when did we start actually putting this benefit in effect and just paying for it by adding even greater pressure on our pension fund?
Well, we took it out of the pension funds in 2014.
No, I know. I'm talking about, has this benefit been in place as long as the pension fund?
It's been there a long time. I looked back to 2001, it was there. I can't tell you how long it's been there, but it's been there for many, many moons. And it was there, as I said, when I looked back into the records, pre-2001, the records are a little harder, pre-vision. But I don't know if Erica has a sense on how long this has been in place. And I don't
I
think
know,
have
I
Erica on the
have
phone
heard
number.
that the cost was very modest and therefore people didn't think that it was really that much of a problem.
Yeah.
But at some point, obviously the cost went from very modest to very substantial. And so I was just wondering at what point, was it in the 80s that we did this? I don't know. The other question that comes here for us is I know this is going to be, I know that there'll be probably other people that see it differently because we fought with people around that this is an expenditure that for a benefit in the same as the pension that this post-employment benefit for for teachers who are currently employed. Should this be paid out of the education fund?
Well, we are neutral on where you pay it. That's.
I know you're probably agnostic on it, but what I'm saying is this in some ways exactly the same decision before us and where this expenditure for currently employed teachers should be covered?
Okay, so.
And I don't have the answer to that, but I think it raises the question, is this any different than the normal retirement contribution for our teachers?
So what I would say to that is a few years ago, I believe it was 18, and Stephanie or someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. You separated out the normal cost of the pension.
It was fiscal year 2018.
There you
that
go.
We separated out the normal cost from the amortized underpayment.
That's correct.
And I know because I led that charge.
Okay.
And so it was in calendar year 2017 that we made that decision for fiscal year 18. And
Okay.
it was, what I'm saying is, it seems to me the question around the ADEC is similar to what we did with the pension obligation.
Yes.
Because if all of this educational related benefit falls to the general fund, obviously it's a huge expenditure, an education related expenditure. And is this any different than normal teachers' retirement? That's really the question. It's not one for you to answer, Beth. I don't mean to. I'm raising it for the committee as I see it as a very analogous question around where this expenditure should be underwritten.
It should be part of the education fund.
Sure, it's part of the cost of the teachers.
We do not control the hiring of teachers. We do not control the contracts. But we do control now. We have a statewide healthcare contract. Am I correct?
Yes, we do.
Given that, I think it clearly is an education fund expense.
Well, you can see what the implications of doing that.
Well, but we've transferred over the sales tax, the portions of the rooms and meals tax. We've done a lot of things to try to shore up the education fund. But when you're spending this kind of money out of the general fund, and we have the pressures that we have, and this is what caused the underfunding in the first place, quite frankly, is that the pressures to spend whatever you have on a variety of things. We have, I just don't see how we can continue to absorb costs that we don't control.
Well, it's an interesting discussion. The other part of this, which is not necessarily the topic of discussion, but when we move the normal costs, that would assume that the ARC, or now the ADAC, adequately was adequate to meet was based on that the actual experience would confirm that that was the correct amount to pay. And this year, we know the contribution is 7 million out of the ed fund, a little bit more than that, and it's jumping to 38 million, and then there's an underfunding that has been built up because the ADAC was not sufficient during those intervening years. The question is, from 18 to 20 to forward, what is the amount of that underfunding, and should that fall to the education fund? Because the ADAC probably that was paid out of the education fund should have been greater. So there are a whole host of questions here relative to how the general fund and the education fund experience this particular cost. And I don't know if we were trying to calculate what that underfunding would be, but within 1 year, it was quite a jump. The underfunding that you got calculated there was what, 300 million or something, Beth?
For the state's teacher system, it was 379 million in the pension fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're correct. The normal costs went up as we did an experience study, which is checking your assumptions and retooling them. The demographic assumptions, which were significant, about 50-50 of the 379 million was demographics. The demographics also disproportionately hit the normal cost, mortality, and assumptions such as that. So that's why the big jump in the education fund.
But
Well,
it
I
didn't
think-
jump all in 1 year. We're building up underfunding, I would think, maybe for the last several years.
The underfunding, the $1.9 billion, 1.933 is over years. Again, the $379 million increase this year. So we're getting back on pensions. In the healthcare, in the pension with the education fund, the normal cost, which is not the unfunded liability, it means if I started today, and you took my salary, you took my years of service. I mean, it's the entry at this point, my probabilities of retirement, which by the way is not for a long time. You would then say, this is the amount of money you need to put aside every year so that when I retire, there's enough dollars to pay my pension. And they aggregate that up for all 9,000, 8,000 employees in the system. And aggregate that up, and then they take a look at it in terms of payroll, and they put that in the norm. They put that you put that in the education fund. So that's what normal cost is. So normal cost does not have any unfunded liability associated with it.
But Beth, that assumes that the normal cost is accurate. And if we were basing it on changed demographics, and returns that didn't materialize, then instead of $7 million, maybe it should have been 10. And that $3 million then flows to add to the underfunding. So my point is, for that period of time, if we went back and trued up what should have been the ADAC paid in versus what actually was, what is that gap and where should it fall to be made up?
Okay. We'll try to clarify that for you. Investment return, for instance, that's an actuarial gain or loss that hence the unfunded liability and not the normal cost. But I'll walk that through with you, Madam Chair, and get you some material on that.
All right, but you do understand, obviously, the increase from 7 and what I can. And this is totally off the OPEB, which we need to get back to.
Yes.
Why teachers ADEC went from 11 million in FY13 down to 7 in this year. Why would that have gone down so dramatically? That's a huge reduction from 13. So the only point is that's past history, but when you true up, if we should have the ADEC, which is based on assumptions, with the benefit of experience, should have not been 7 million, it should have been 10 or 12. Should that additional 5 million to true up come from the education fund?
We're
That,
trying to get that
and
together.
that's not a question for you. It's one that we did not think about when we did the normal cost. So
Mhm.
every time the ADEC is off, and because of the investment return assumptions or the demographics, right now, all of that underfunding is falling to the general fund.
That's correct.
And
But-
that's the question,
Mhm.
That is out there.
Yeah.
And just to put it in perspective, this year, the revenues that are going into the education fund are greater than the general fund.
Okay.
So for those of us who are working with a budget that is really trying to support all of state government and, the general fund, it really shows how we have had to make difficult choices and the pressure that it's putting on all of the state government as a result. But right now, all funds are not equal, but this year the education fund is greater than the general fund.
And I have to speak up because it's
Well,
frustrating.
go right
to
ahead,
me.
Senator Sears.
We're being asked to provide more and more to higher education. Right? I mean, that's a
Right.
huge thing, and you've got the special committee, we're looking at the state college, looking at all this. And all of the money that we're spending here on the pension funds, the teachers' pension funds, is not even reflected in the cost per student in this state. So we are understating the cost of public education in this state in terms of the up to high school. And I think at the very least, as an accounting purposes, just as we might with anything, we look at what is the federal fund, what's the general fund, what is the cost per student? It's astronomical when you add in all of this. And I think we're doing a disservice to the public for them not to know, because it's coming out of a different fund, and so it doesn't show up.
Well, but
I just think that at least we should be, speaking of transparency earlier, we should at least know what it costs per student and including these costs onto that. Secondly, I will say that the money that we're eating up here, and then the request for increases to higher ed, and then we have all the other requests for increases from various state agencies. It ain't gonna happen.
well, that's
There's a limited amount of money, even if you raise taxes, even if you have a dedicated tax to the teachers' retirement fund.
You couldn't raise enough taxes.
I just think we, at the very least, need to start talking about what it really costs to educate a kid in the state of Vermont.
Well, the normal cost now is reflected, and that was part of the argument that we used, is that, it is just part of the K through 12 system. The part that we haven't really addressed is the OPEB piece. And when you true up, and if in fact the ADEC was lower than what was actually needed, where should that burden fall? And those are the two pieces that this whole discussion relative to our K through 12 system are raising, relative to the two funds, and where should that obligation be accommodated. And we aren't going to decide this today, but it raises two areas of funding, and one is the OPEB. And is OPEB contribution any different than the normal cost of retirement?
Okay. So the answer to that is that the normal cost, and I'm going to defer to Will if I get this wrong, the normal cost for the OPEB is $14 million.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, the other piece to this, in answer to why it went from 13 or whatever number down to 7, is that the normal cost is a function of payroll, so it's X% of payroll. And as staffing patterns went down in the teacher system, the normal cost went down as well. And again, if I got that wrong, someone tell me. I'm very open to having folks, let's get the answers correct here.
Well, the number of enrollees didn't change very much.
The
Employees between 13 and, so that's because I asked Ashlyn for the numbers were, in terms of number of teachers employed.
They haven't changed, only a few, maybe.
Yeah,
100.
even though the number of students is down, the actual number of employees
Stayed the same.
didn't change too much.
It did go down some, but the other portion of that, Madam Chair, is the discount rate that we use to in terms of valuing our liabilities. So that is the state system. Again, the normal cost for the OPEB right now for the teachers is $14 million. And again, we are not, I like your term better than neutral. We are agnostic as to where that is paid as long as it is paid. So do you want me to continue with the chart?
Yeah, I realize that but this is very helpful because then out of the figure that you gave, around what you asked for, the 41.8, I don't have the thing, I'm doing it off the top of my head,
Yep.
includes the 14 normal plus some, no, it doesn't include the 14? Will is shaking his head. The 41.8?
I'll let Will answer that.
So the benefits for the pay-go are part of it, and then there's a portion that's being covered by the 41.8 with Beth's other amendment, which I don't know that she's spoken to yet, that would cover the normal cost, Beth.
Yes.
What is in the 41.8 if the 14 isn't part of it?
The 14 is part of it. It just isn't all of the 14.
Oh,
It's not enough above the pay-go cost. So the pay-go is the benefits we're going to pay for this year. So if you added 14 million to the pay-go costs, right, you'd be closer to $50 million, $49 million. So since this is only 41.8, you're not fully paying the 14 million normal cost, is what I'm saying.
But over time you will be.
Well, should we be paying the full normal cost and think have that funded out of the ed fund and then look at what the balance and look at it a little backwards from what you were doing?
Well, if you pay the full ADEC and you cover the normal cost, it is a more expensive endeavor to what you have right now. So right now, if you were to do the ADEC, it's $52.2 million, which is obviously higher than 41.8. That will grow at least at 3%, probably a little more than that, and that's getting into the weeds on why. So I'm going to not do that unless you want me to. So the next year would be 53.7. And so on. So it would be all the way through with that alternative schedule that we presented to you, at least in the front years. Over in the back, in the late years, it'll kind of reverse itself. But right now, by 2027, so 5 years out, the difference would be about 27 million, although we're asking for another 13, so the net difference would be about $14 million. So the question I have for you is, if we can get to pre-funding, and you want to do the ADEC, we would be delighted to have that as a solution. But it would require, instead of the 35.1 million that the governor's request, it would require $52.2 million.
Yeah, Beth, how much interest do we pay if we don't pay at all?
Well, we're over the pay-go.
No, per year. What's the percentage that we would have to pay if we didn't pay it?
You mean if we borrowed the money to fund the benefit?
Yes, what would the interest be?
You mean like an OPEB bond or a pension obligation bond? Is that what you're
Yeah.
referring to, sir?
Yeah,
You're the person that rigs up and pays the bill. How much would the interest be if percentage wise, if we didn't pay it all and had to borrow the money to pay the difference?
Well, the interest rate that we discount the liabilities is at 7%. So you would have an opportunity loss on that money of roughly 7%.
So if you borrow money to pay bills, you have to pay 7%?
No, what I'm saying is that if you don't, oh boy, I just started to leave the meeting, so let me fix that. There we go. The opportunity cost on any dollar that you don't fund is 7%. At least I think I'm doing that right. And again, I'm going to defer to Will on that. He's shaking his head yes. If we were to borrow money to pay it because we are over the pay-go, in other words, we have enough money to pay the premiums. If you wanted to borrow money to pay the full unfunded liability, for instance, that's called an OPEB bond. So you would go out to the market, you would borrow money. It would be at a cheaper rate. And the theory is that if you do that and you earn 7%, you get a gain. The problem with that is that almost everyone who tries that, they end up with a loss the next year. For instance, Connecticut did it in 2007, said, oh, we'll make some money off of this. And then the Great Recession hit and, they had 30% losses and still had to pay the OPEB. So you don't want to go into a borrowing situation. We are, in fact, paying the pay-go. What we're suggesting here is more than the pay-go. And by doing that, lowering the interest costs, raising some money, and getting to a path for full funding and pre-funding. So I think what we're doing is cost effective. Again, your other alternative, and we would be all in if you wanted to fund the ADEC. But if you do that, it will be, again, from, what was that number I just gave you? 52.2.
52.2.
Yeah.
so you're talking about the ADEC on the OPEB?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So you would have to go from 35.1 million in the budget, the governor's request, to 52.2. Our request is 41.8, and it
Yeah,
gets.
but we aren't paying the bill. We aren't funding it at 41.8.
You are over time. It's you can fund the ADEC. It's again, it's more money, but again, and you would say that this year you probably have more dollars than you will, but that ADEC will grow. And the question is, it's 52 now. If it's 57 or 58 million in 2025. Are you going to be able to pay that? If it's in 2036, if it's 79 million, are you going to be able to pay that? And are you going to be able to pay in 2038, 84 million? It's not a one-time contribution. And, the comment that was just made was that you can't afford this. If you can afford it, I'm all in. But we're trying to get to a plan that gets you to pre-funding. If you, in fact, trying to get to that pre-funding, and also question that you have about how much money we're putting into this. Our funding plan is, in fact, a intermediate effort to get this thing rolling, and we think it's good. But if you could do the ADEC, if the governor was going to commit to instead of 35.1 million, 52 million this year, 54 million the next year, 55 million, and again, those numbers will actually go up a little bit because there's another piece to the normal cost that needs to be factored in. I'm really into the weeds if I try to explain that one. But if you're willing to put money in at that level, it's more than what obviously it's more than what you've been paying. It's more than what our request is. Our request is here because the answer was that we couldn't afford to do this, and we came up with a process that gets you to pre-funding, gets you to full funding in the out years, and does so in a way that's more predictable for the budget. If you see in that far column to the right, that what we're doing there is increasing this in increments of 3%. 10% the first year's 3%. The ADEC is more volatile, as you saw in the pensions. One year you have gains, one year you have losses. So you might be in a position where it's 50 million this year, you've got some losses, claims experience went up, and now it's 60 million. What we're doing in this proposal is to hard code the impact or the increment going forward, putting enough money in the front end. So I'm going to add, besides the 6.7, we're looking for 13.3, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then you have consistency from one year to the next in the budget. It's predictable and manageable. If you want to do the ADEC, there are
It's predictable. I don't know how manageable as I look at the amounts. That's the question.
If you do the ADEC, it will be more. If you do the ADEC, it will be more in the front years.
So I am so confused in terms of the 14 million you say is the normal cost. I would treat normal cost as the ADEC. That's how the context of we do it within pensions. Now you're telling me that the ADEC is like 51 as opposed to, which includes the normal. And it seems to me, are we doing a two-step like we are with pensions? What is normal and what is the and then the payment for the underfunding? So are we paying, the 14 is pay-go and anything above it is a contribution toward pre-funding?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
The ADEC in the pension fund is made up of two pieces: the normal cost plus an amortization of the unfunded liability. So basically, you're paying it like you were paying a mortgage out to 2038 in the pension fund, out to 2049 here, because we started this later in the process. So the ADEC is made up of both of those pieces. So the mortgage payment on the unfunded liability plus the normal cost. If you were to do the ADEC to do that mortgage payment, you would have to get to that $52 million number. We recognize that that is the best approach, but it puts more pressure on the budgets because it's not just a one-time expense. It is building into the base more cost. And we would love to have you do that. We're all in if that's what you want to do. But, the comments I'm also is you don't.
I don't know what I want to do, Beth. I am so confused at this point. I know, for example, for teachers in FY22, the normal cost was the 38.9.
Yes.
Which I thought was the ARC or the ADEC for the pension money, for the pension, not OPEB, just the pension. And then we had to, because of the amortization of the underfunding prior to 2007, we put that it was 157 million for that unfunded underfunding liability payment. For so we split it up. How much is for normal right now, and then how much are we paying to get pay what we should have paid? Okay. So I'm trying, maybe I am wrong to think of the OPEB in the same way, but when I'm thinking of 14 million for normal, I was thinking of that as the same as 30, almost 39 million normal for the pension. Then you had the 157 catch up. So that's why I'm thinking, well, if we look at OPEB in the same way, is the 14 million the normal that we would make sense that the education fund should be paying? And then is there's the balance is to build up the reserves so that you've got, you're moving out of the pay as you go arrangement to pre-funding.
Okay, again, the 14 million is the normal cost. If you chose to put that in the ed fund, you can do that. If we have to prorate this, and I'm going to again turn to Will, if we did this on our funding, would we have to prorate that money?
What do you mean by prorating it?
The 14 million would be not. Since you're paying a less ADEC, would you have to prorate? I don't think you do. I think it would still be the 14 million.
It would, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go back to just using the pension number for you. So the normal cost is about 38 million, as you just mentioned. In the 22 budget, the normal cost is $196.2 million because you have a unfunded liability of 1,933, which has to be paid off by 2038. So your payment on this is the 196.2 minus the 38 million is the amount that that's essentially the mortgage payment to pay down the 1.9 billion dollars. If it was
Yeah.
not a billion, I'd be really happy. So in the case of this system, if you were to try to do the same thing and pay it out to 2048 or 49, you would have to put $52 million in there, of which 14 million would be the normal cost. And the balance is your mortgage payment on a 30-year amortization. Now we're down to, at the beginning of this process, now we're down to, is that 27? We would have to have that mortgage payment. And the point about the mortgage payment is if you're using one-time dollars to fund it, you have to continue to do that with ongoing dollars. We're all in if you're willing to do that. What we're trying to find in this thing, because we were in a position where the answer was no, we can't fund the ADEC. If you notice in the governor's budget that they don't do that, they pay just the PAYGO. And if you look, there's a pension OPEB accountability report. I'm not quite sure how that is.
I am totally confused. I must say, and I have no idea why we have to have mortgages. We're a state of Vermont. Secondly, first, and I don't know why, one is in 2049, one is 2038. I'm trying to keep track of everything.
Yeah.
I think I need I don't know what I need, but I need a tutorial just on why does the state have a mortgage? We don't have mortgages.
Well, we amortized that underpayment back when we had that special commission, as I understand it, in 2006.
But if I understand what you're saying, Beth, the governor put some 100 million in extra this year, but he needs to keep putting in 100 million extra in every year, in perpetuity, or at least until 2038, which is beyond my, like saying a trillion. Okay. And so that's taking, let me just finish. Yeah. That's taking $100 million every year for the next, 28 years, 27 years. Yeah. And once that's done, then we're paid off the whole liability if everything goes as planned and there's no huge recession or something else.
Correct.
But taking that 100 million says to me that we can't have 45 million for state colleges. We can't have an agency of natural resource. Something's got to give. Or we need to raise $100 million in new taxes. Am I off base here?
No, you're not. Let me, it's more
than. But let me just say that that's what the dilemma is for me as a member of this committee and a member of the Senate. Is I think everybody's fine with committing 100 million this year, but I know a lot of the committee members would like to see us add a $45 million to the state colleges, do other things, probably want to keep an agency of natural resources, probably keep some of the other functions of state government that aren't absolutely necessary. Like, I think state police are absolutely necessary. Department of Corrections is probably necessary, but some of the things that we do are not absolutely necessary. That's where the dilemma is, and I don't know that the governor is willing to raise 100 million in new taxes, or if the legislature is.
Or
so am I off base here? And where
no, I think what we look. This is getting excruciatingly complicated. I think we're going to have to spend more time, and we're going to have to break it down into something more manageable than the life beyond us, so to speak. If I had $20 million that we wanted to put to OPEB, what difference would it make? And how would it help? But there's a larger discussion, and that is whether this OPEB burden should all fall to the general fund.
Okay.
When we're talking about our teachers and we're talking about the cost of our K-12, so we have two different, and so I'm like sort of, maybe if we had some extra money here, which we do, if we put 20 or 25 million toward that OPEB liability, what would it give us? And at some point, maybe it's this year, we've got to say, I mean, I'll have to tell you, Beth, that response to teachers about the changes in the pension fund have not been very kind to us.
What do you mean?
And we are getting accused of failing to fulfill our obligation when we have been paying the ADEC in full, when we have been paying the underpayment from 2007. And so maybe part of this is failing to make it clear the extent to which our K through 12 system is costing, and how, as Senator Sears was saying, how we make it clear what is the cost of that system, which is primarily labor. And so I was just trying to understand how, and maybe I know that Chris Roop and hopefully the folks from Joint Fiscal are listening, can help us sort of figure out to chunk this down. If we were to do a certain amount now, how would that help? What would be comparable to say, you know, one thing that we have to do is this is a benefit that current teachers are going to experience, and it has to be paid for. And should it be paid for out of the education fund?
Yeah.
The same as everything else, because the general fund as it is doesn't have the capacity to simply pick it up or absorb it.
Senator, you're asking questions that are not the purview of our office.
I know.
And I'd like to just say, you know, we're going to run out of time here. Looking at this chart, let me just give you the answer here that you were looking for. For $20 million, so we would put 6.7 million into the 22 budget. We would also, as I said, there was an amendment to this. We have 8.7 million for healthcare assets. We would ask that you put in $13.3 million more. So for $20 million into this system, okay, and then building off of that contribution at increments of 10% for a few years, then move it down to 3%. You get to a funded ratio of 100%, and actually beyond that, you get to 103% in 2000 and if I could, 2046. This is a way to get to pre-funding. And you said, what can we do with $20 million? The answer is here. Now, if you want the alternative, you can increase the ADEC, and you can. And by the way, over those in 2 years, based on that ADEC amount, it will exceed the amount that you're doing here. You have to put in another 5.7, and then by 5 years, $14 million over and above the 20 million we are asking for. That's a lowball number. I think it's going to be a tad higher. So the point is, you can have two alternatives. You can put in the ADEC, which will cost you, we're talking OPEB, which will, by the end of 2038, and keeping in mind that I only did it that far out, it goes out to 2049, you will be putting in $56 million more using the ADEC. We'll all in if that's what you want to do. But we can come to a middle ground with pre-funding started with this proposal with $20 million. It does create consistency in the budget. I grant you, that as you say that we can't afford this, you have to pay your debts first. And that's my bottom line in terms of ongoing expenses. This, and I use the term mortgage, Senator, because I'm using an analogy there. This is a debt that's owed, and we need to pay down our debts to be responsible in government. That's first.
But
How much?
it's a future cost.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not as though we've spent it and and then we're borrowing the money to pay the cost. It's anticipated costs in the future.
So
That we're,
again, yeah,
Yeah.
I use the mortgage analogy because let's say you have a mortgage for $200,000. You don't pay the $200,000 all in one year. You pay it in increments going forward. And that's what we're looking at here, an increment to get to full funding of the obligation. And that's the request that we're making is 20 million to do that. We would need a policy change. We have the language to provide that, and it gets pre-funding on a jump start to that. If you want to spend more, we'd be happy to do that. We would be happy to say, go for the 52 million, but then your policy statement has to say that's going to grow every year at a rate that's faster or more dollars at the front end than the
yeah,
plan.
but just like your mortgage, you have a standard amount, but sometimes a mortgage would say, if you can make some additional payments, then that helps draw down what that liability is.
Absolutely.
So I don't think we're going to sort it out today. I'm hoping that the folks from Joint Fiscal are listening to this and can help us put together a document that would help us sort this out. But I think we're looking at it from where should this funding obligation fall? And that's a different issue because right now it is all falling to the general fund, even the normal, what we would call the current cost that should be, that is being, that needs to be paid, and what fund should pay it. And that I know is not going to be an easy discussion, but it is one that I think we've had before when we said the normal cost of teachers' retirement should be paid the same as salary, the same as leave time, the same as any other cost of our K through 12 budget. So that's a different discussion than just for you, Beth, but it's one that gets caught up here, that we're saying this has got to be perhaps a shared burden. And right now it's all falling to the general fund. Senator Westman, and then Senator Starr.
I would hope the Joint Fiscal Office that's listening to this would take, and if we move this into the ed fund, what would it do to the ed fund in the immediate few years, and what would that look like? And so we could make a comparison.
So
I think that's all down the road for us. But I have a pretty easy question. How much money do we actually owe to the pension funds?
sure.
The pension funds or the OPEB, Bobby?
Both. I mean, if we owe money, we're indebted to somebody for this money. How much do we owe as a state?
Okay, we're indebted to ourselves. We have an obligation to pay our debts, and that's what this is. And we make installments. So in the case of the teacher system, the unfunded liability, the amount that of the liability that exceeds assets is $1,933 million on the at this point in time. It used to be 1.5 billion. It increased, as I said, the entire unfunded liability increased by 604 million. So 1,933. Let me go to the VSERS to give you that answer.
It's not as much. It's only $1 billion.
Yeah, it's $1,040,000,040, 1,040.5, so $1,040,000,040.
And that is projected though out. It isn't what we owe anybody, right? Today.
It's what you owe to pay the promised benefits, and you pay it over time, and that's the amount that you owe to pay, benefits for all active members upon retirement, as well as current retirees.
Yeah, but we don't owe it today.
No. It's on the books though, and for accounting purposes, it is considered a liability. But you're right; it's not money that we've paid out that we borrowed. But I have to go to Senator Sears next, and then
Well,
we'll
actually,
go
you
around.
answered part of my question. Beth.
Okay.
But
If I could
You're
say what,
basically talking what is owed. Is this everybody retired today?
Yeah, basically, probably wouldn't
So
even be
if you
that much.
changed it, but if you changed the formula and all new hires were X and changed that, that wouldn't
Yeah.
change what we owe for all of those folks who are currently working or currently
okay,
retired.
I think that's an
So,
important point, Senator. Thank you.
I'm trying to distinguish between what might
Okay.
happen in the legislature.
Okay,
I don't think you can go back on your promise to those that are already retired. You didn't
No.
suggest that. So it's hard to see those that already signed up. We went, but anyway,
so
I'm
if
just
I
trying
could,
to understand that when we talk about what the state owes, we're talking about if everybody retired today
Today.
and we were owing that.
I think what it is the future benefits too. So everybody that's in the system retired as we expected them to in terms of the probabilities. And again, I'm going to look over and see if Will is shaking his head yes or no on that one. Yes. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
That helps me understand what we're
Sure.
talking about here.
Sure.
And we've got a federal government that's spending money
Mhm.
right now based upon a crisis, and they're talking in the trillions.
Yep.
They obviously can print money, we can't.
Exactly.
But their debt grows, but they don't have to deal with it. Our debt grows, we have to deal with it.
Yes, sir.
So you've made some recommendations.
Mhm.
We'll, the legislature and the governor will need to deal with those recommendations. But I can't understand all of what you're telling us about this solution.
And not this afternoon either, because it's like
No.
4:15, and I think our brains are fried.
Well, I know mine was before I even, as soon as I heard OPEC and DOPEC and ADAC and
Okay.
all those other terms, it's like a jargon alert for me.
Okay.
Mhm.
May
Yeah.
I make two more statements, and I'll try to keep it simple, Madam Chair?
Yes, just,
Okay.
yeah, 2 and simple will be probably all we can take.
Sure. So to your point, Senator Sears, if you were to stop the pension today, you would still owe those obligations over time to those people. So the unfunded liability would not change. So if you stop the system, let's say went to a defined contribution plan, you would still have the unfunded liability. It would still grow, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I can do that another time. And the defined contribution plan would cost you more than our current pension plan. So you're actually adding costs by that and not eliminating the unfunded liability. So that's why we are recommending painful changes so that we can keep the system sustainable and not eat up all your budget, but at the same time have retirement security. In the case, yes, sir.
Go ahead. No, I'm just going to use myself as an example.
Okay.
I don't have a pension.
Yep.
I have some IRAs. They got whacked badly
Yes.
by recessions. They go up, they go down.
Yep.
So what I have is not what I had before. Are we making up for those recessionary times too? Or our investments sure things? I mean, there's nothing
Of course
sure,
not.
but
Of course not.
I put money in the bank and get 0.5% interest.
Yeah. So,
It looks pretty pitiful, but
Yeah. Well, let me
It
make
is.
another point, and then I'll leave it at that. So that's what I said about the pensions. Bottom line is that protecting the defined benefit plan is better for the taxpayer, better for retirement security, and costs less. And again, any change that moved from a defined benefit would not change the unfunded liability. For the OPEBs, right now, our liability is 1.2 billion, going up to 1.4 billion. And if you do not have a plan for pre-funding, you're not going to reduce that. Right now, you'd reduce it, the 1.4 by 820 million, if I remember that number correctly. And you're on a path to make it more cost effective. And it's doing so at a more manageable rate than paying the ADEC. On the other hand, if you want to pay the whole amount, and put that into the budget, we're all in. But you need to have pre-funding. We're going to go out to bonds shortly. And when they take a look at our attributes, they give us high marks for fiscal stability. They give us high marks for staying within our budget. As hard as that is, Senator. Where we get low marks is in our demographics, in our workforce. And those are the ones that have affected us the most. But pensions, especially with these increases and the OPEB liabilities, weigh heavily on the perception and the rating that we have, the scoring we have. I can't tell you what will happen to the rating because rating agencies make those decisions. But these are areas of concern, and our job is to make sure that we deal with that. And our job is to pay our debts first and not put it into current.
Right. So I'm just going to make a statement, then you don't have to respond.
Yes.
So if we artificially lower our property tax rate by 8 cents, what you're saying is we shouldn't be artificially lowering it. We should put that money into the retirement funds, pay off what we owe.
I guess what I would say to you is we're neutral on the revenue, but we do need.
I didn't expect you to comment. I just wanted to make that comment that we are artificially lowering the property tax rate by 8. I think it's 8 cents in the governor's budget. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I believe it's gone from 9 cents to 1 cent.
Okay.
Well, that's because of the.
But putting money in. So we're artificially lowering that rate. So we look good to the property taxpayer, but at the same time, we're allowing the pension to grow.
That would assume that the 9 cents, the assumptions were correct and they were not. So because it was assumed school budgets were going to come in at 3% and they're coming in much, much less. So some of that 9 cents was based on assumptions that when you go back and true it up, aren't right.
Okay. Well, that may be true, but my point is if we're putting money to artificially lower the property tax rate, and at the same time, we're refusing to adequately fund the pensions.
No, we don't owe a dime, we were told.
Well, because we haven't spent, I think this is being driven by the GASB changes, isn't it? Where you have to recognize these liabilities as opposed to,
No.
or not?
No, the GASB is separate from funding. So the GASB is an accounting exercise. Funding is a way to get to paying off your debts or paying off your liabilities and making good on your promises. For me, again, paying down that liability over time is essential. And again, I would urge you, I know we haven't gone through the chart part by part. I think that if I had the opportunity to do that, it would be a little clearer. But the bottom line for me is $20 million up front, sticking to a payment schedule. And moving forward, you will be able to lower those liabilities by $800 million, put that on our books, be more efficient with our dollars, earn interest on those dollars. It's a win-win-win. It's good for economic development too. When people are looking to invest in Vermont and they see all these liabilities and they see the demographics and they see the economy, they get worried, okay? We want to make sure that they see the best step forward, that we are, which we have been historically, taking care of our finances, moving forward. And again, I would say pay down your debts first.
Well, they are debt. I mean, to some extent, they're anticipated costs, or as you say, they're obligations. They're future obligations. So it's not like we have gone out and borrowed money and we're paying it back. What we're doing is putting forward into a fund the money that will be there to meet those future obligations.
Yes, we don't owe the money. It's not
yet.
But
Yes, you do, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
we
Because
do owe it.
you owe that money, because if you do not fund it, the bottom line is that's to take care of existing employees, their obligations as they exist now, and their future obligations all the way through their expected date.
But that's what I'm talking about. Those future obligations are the ones that we, it's not as though those are expenditures that we have right now. Those are obligations or costs that are going to be experienced in the future.
But they are a debt.
I understand they are. Yeah.
It's called what's a soft debt. A hard debt would be something like a general obligation bond, which is what
Yeah.
we're going into in March. We want to be able to put our best foot forward. If we're going to resolve this, resolve it now so that we have a track record of fiscal responsibility.
Okay, I don't think we can absorb any more of this. We're kind of going around what we
Yeah.
should do and what we can do, and which fund should be doing what and to what extent. So I'm going to suggest that at this point, we are Thursday, we've gone without a break, and I think we're going to need to adjourn the committee for today, if you would, Chrissy. And we'll have some further discussion. I need to talk to committee members and the staff about what we